the stories that I decide to tell are essentially the stories of my mother, right? And the women that I grew up seeing and being around in community with, but whom I didn't see their stories around me, whether that was in TV or movies or books. I didn't see my mother's story of struggle and love and dignity being told the way that I was living it. And so when I had the opportunity and the ability to be an artist, I really wanted to shine a light on those unsung heroes, stories of people whom we tend to ignore and we don't see when we walk on the street, but whom I believe are the foundation to this country, whom I believe are the fabric of what this country is built on. And so those stories that I've told are the stories of mostly single moms, the stories of immigrants in many cases, the stories of economic struggle, but ultimately they are the love stories of women and children, of their mothers and their children. And Sanctuary is another one of those stories. It is ultimately a love story between a mother and a daughter, and everything that a mother will do to try and save her daughter. And yet, when she's unable to save her, everything that a daughter will do to hold true to her promise to her mother, to take care of her little brother, to make little brother make it out to the other side. And it's very inspiring for me to be able to tell this story along with Abby, because it is ultimately the story that is what so many immigrants have done when they've come to this country. And that is a beautiful and an honorable thing to be able to be a part of.
Paola, I read elsewhere that you had mentioned that when looking back at your own experiences with your mother, having migrated from Colombia to LA, and you had mentioned that the community, and I could have this wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that you felt like the community wasn't there for you somehow.
Well, I would say that I grew up in a community that was lower to working class, so it was a poor community, and so everybody on our block, all the parents on our block were working, right? Like there were lots of kids home by themselves. And there wasn't a lot of resources given to the community in and of itself. And so I grew up in the 90s in LA, and that meant that there was a lot of gang violence and opportunities the only opportunity that was available to us in our communities were gangs. And so at a very young age, I started gang banging. And it was because, my own personal story is that when we arrived to the United States, my brother, my mother, and I, to be reunited with my father abandoned us. He told my mom that he was going to work, and he just never came back. And he left my mom with a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old with $200 in her pocket. We had absolutely no family here. My mom was the first person to come from our country to this country. She had a high school education and knew absolutely no English. So I saw my mother's struggle, everyday struggle of trying to put food on the table. Some days she succeeded and some days she didn't. And so my anger at being abandoned by my father, by seeing my mother struggle so much, and by just being aware of the uncertainty of our lives, the only outlet that I had in the community that I grew up in was gangs. And I think that is a failure of what the United States government does for Black and brown communities. They leave us to fend for ourselves. They give us poor schooling, poor housing, over-policed. They've created a school to prison pipeline, which I was very much indoctrinated in by the age of 12. Thank God I was able to break out of that, but I was only able to break out of that because of my mother's tenacity and my mother's ability to send me back to Colombia, right? She had to, in order to save me, she had to send me back to Colombia. That was in the middle of a fucking huge drug war in the 90s with Pablo Escobar. And yet it was the going back to Colombia that really quite literally saved my life, because I would have either been dead in jail or on drugs. And so that is what I talk about with regards to the community not having the ability, not the people, but the systematic community not being able to give its citizens, and I don't say that by papers, I mean that citizens by people that live in that community, what we are ultimately paying into, because we know that working class folk pay a lot of taxes, and we don't see the benefits of those taxes the way that we should.
Thank you, Paola. Yeah, powerful. Abby, how might you see you and your work intervening intellectually, creatively, politically? And you can go wherever you'd like with that.
Yeah, I feel like the word intervention was like a dirty word where I grew up. I definitely come from a more quiet community, and yet I dealt with a lot of death at a very young age. My aunt and my father died within a year of each other when I was very little, and I kind of spiraled into a bunch of different mental illnesses surrounding my fear of losing people. And I think I think it was like of the utmost importance again, and Paola and I connected on this early on, seeing my mom handling 3 young children all by herself. She wasn't abandoned, but she was a young widow, and she needed to just put one foot in front of the other and get stuff done and go to work and put food on the table and make sure that the neighbors weren't wondering what was going on in our house. Why were people dying all around us? She remarried, and then my stepfather died as well. So it was this cycle of things that we didn't want to talk about, and we didn't want to make it bigger than it already was. And I think when I started writing, actually my aunt, who I was very close to, who passed away when I was very little, was the one that always told me to write everything down. And she, every year, she would give me a diary or a leotard. And I would be like, oh, I don't want either of these, but thank you. And slowly I started seeing what she meant. Like my intervention was going to come from me and my feelings. And I started writing about why I had to pray for hours a day, or why I couldn't eat things, or why I was collecting garbage because I was scared of killing people. And it became my kind of therapy. And now I love being able to write the things that I've never been able to say. And I think that that's how I connect with people.
Beautiful. That's a really nice segue to the next question, which is the co-creative process. There's clearly so much common ground that you both share in the very different ways and the different experiences that you've had that inspire you to do the intervention work that you culturally on the boots on the ground, everything that you're doing today. So maybe you can share with our readers, with our listeners, viewers, the process, the co-creative process with Sanctuary, and were there challenges? Clearly, you guys, I've had this experience myself working with others, where you can kind of finish each other's sentences because you shared so much, right? And you see the world in such a similar way. But were there challenges? Were there kind of surprises, other aspects of this sort of co-creating of Sanctuary that you might share? Paola, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I as an artist love to collaborate. It is how I work best. Individually is in collaboration. If you look at my career, I've done more collaborations than I've worked by myself, and I collaborate with a whole host of people's. Oftentimes I go and I collaborate again. It's my process that I enjoy the most. And I have to say that, and I've said this lots of times, and I'm not just saying this because Abby is here, I have had, I've only honestly had one challenging collaboration where I did not work with that person again. And we didn't talk for a few years, but now we're friends out of probably, 15, 20. So like, I really love collaborating, but all those collaborations come with like what you're asking, challenges, personality challenges, creative challenges, scheduling challenges, like whatever challenges arise, they just are part of the process. And I like those challenges. But I will say that with Abby, it was the least challenging collaboration that I've ever had. It was very seamless. It was very, it doesn't mean that we didn't have disagreements creatively on things. Of course we did, but the process to then get to the agreement, the thing that we decided on, was ultimately very, very seamless. And Abby and I had never worked together before. We'd never met each other. I interviewed a variety of different writers to find a co-writer. And I decided to go with Abby because I felt that it was, there was just an energy there that I was like, I could work with her. It was going to be a very fast process. We wrote this book from idea to finish in a year and a half, right, Abby? I think
so, yeah.
Yeah. So it was fast, and it was just it was an instinctual thing, which my instincts proved correct because Abby, I would say, and I worked really, really well together.
Abby.
Yeah, it was amazing. I definitely come from a performing background where I was always collaborating, like on the road with people that became my family. And then I went to the very solitary life of a writer where I would literally sob at the end of the day. Like, I just want to talk to somebody. And then when this opportunity came along, I was so excited. And I think what was particularly fun is that Paola has an amazing breadth of action and of experience. And so in many ways, she always knew the plot. I mean, she was always devising how we were going to literally get out of, a situation that I never knew could be gotten out of. And I come from a much more, like, I write about characters until I see where they're going to go. But as she just said, we didn't have time to like figure it out slowly. Both the timeline of publishing and the timeline of our hero, I felt like, no, we can't like think about how she's feeling right now while she's trying to take care of her brother who's dying in a desert. Like, we can't dwell on her feelings that much. We need to get her out of the desert. And so it was humbling and also so inspiring. And I just hope we can collaborate more.
I love it. And it's so kind of antithetical to the industry, right? To have two creative people working together to world build, right? We know we accept it with film and we accept it with comic books and so on and so forth, but it seems so unusual for, a real co-creative team to be making a novel, right? And I love it. It's so awesome. And I hope that it like opens a floodgate for more of that. Why YA? And do you even think of this as a YA novel, and why, if you do? Maybe Paola?
Yeah. Well, YA, because we believe the answer to the world that we are presenting, the problem of the world that we are presenting lies in young people. Valley is our protagonist. She is our heroine, because I firmly, and I think I can speak for Abby too, believe that it is young people that will lead us through the end of this. It is young people that will create a better world. It is the generation of young people that will fix our mistakes, unfortunately, and there are many. And so for me, I also wanted to be able to tell the story of a young person who was undocumented. When we started writing this book, there wasn't that many books that had undocumented young people as the protagonist that told a full, dignified story. It's interesting because now this summer and this fall, there's actually quite a few books now that are dealing with undocumented young people, which I think is amazing and great, because we need as many stories out there about young people that are undocumented. But when we decided to embark on this story, there was really a lack of that. And with regards to, is it YA? It was actually Sean who said that it was, Sean's last name is escaping me right now.
Taylor.
Sean's last name. Taylor, yeah. It was Sean Taylor that said that this book is intergenerational. And I really love that idea, because it is for young audiences, but it also has some major themes and big issues that should have an adult or an older person navigating the young person through this. I mean, I think it's a really great way for young people to have deep, in-depth conversations with those that are older than them, and maybe have differing views on them. Like, really just kind of start unpacking the ideas of immigration and papers and xenophobia and racism and sexual violence and the environment. There's just so much to unpack that you can have these really deep discussions cross-generationally. So I do think it is YA. I think, though, it needs to be, an ideal world, deconstructed and analyzed with an adult as well.
Do you want to add something, Abby?
Boy, I don't know if there is anything to add. I totally agree. I think young adult, it's shortened to YA, but it's funny because it really is about treating the youth as adults. Like, we have a hard time in our society deciding what a child can handle and what a young adult, when do you become a young adult? And for undocumented children, like, they don't even have that choice. They don't get to say, like, well, you can't handle this now, because they're thrown into these horrors. And I think that it's a real luxury to say, oh, I'm going to save this till when you're older, and you can handle this situation. And so it's really important to me and to Paola, I think, to write about the ugly truth and also about the possibility of being part of the change even when you're young. And I don't know if that makes it young adult, but we definitely have a young adult hero.
Absolutely. In fact, what you've just kind of described is the marker, for me anyway, of great fiction, right? Great fiction, whether we have a teen protagonist or an adult protagonist, something that opens new vistas, right? Sharpens our emotions, our perceptions of the world, and at the same time, opens us to kind of potential new ways of existing, right? I love that. So let me ask, this is another way of asking why sci-fi or speculative fit sort of as a genre or a constraint. But let me ask this. We so rarely see Latinxes, Latinos, Latinas in sci-fi in the mainstream. How do you respond to that in relation to what you've now created in the world?
Yeah, I think that, we are not there in those stories because the writers of those stories are predominantly white, and we don't necessarily exist in their world, right? To be frank and to be honest, I think it's the same with the Black community. That white writers don't see brown and Black people in the future. They see a very white world, and it is evident in how they imagine the future. And so I think it is incumbent upon us, our communities, to force ourselves into that narrative, because we will be in the future. And the reality is that the future holds more of us, Black and brown people, ultimately, especially in the United States I'm talking about, not even the rest of the world, but in the United States, holds more Black and brown than it will white people, right? And so we must write ourselves into the narrative. And I think that I've been very inspired and just starting to get into Afrofuturism. and the importance of Afrofuturism and the importance of Octavia Butler, of that idea that not only this is Afrofuturism as I understand it, and I'm just in the beginnings of understanding it, but not only are Black people in the future, but they are thriving. They are incredible. They are living in this incredible future that they themselves are the protagonists of. And so I think what we need more of a mainstream movement in the Latinx community here in the United States. And so to me, it's exciting to be able to be part of that story genre because of what it represents. I read a quote in college that really has formed my outlook as an artist, and I didn't really realize how important it was to me in all of my work. And I have it in the author's note in the book, and it's by Brecht, who's a German playwright. I come from the theater, who's a German playwright and director. And he said, art is not a mirror with which to reflect reality, but rather a hammer with which to shape it. And I believe that so wholeheartedly, and Sanctuary is my hammer. It is our hammer. It is how I see. It's a clarion call. It's a warning call. This could happen if we don't fight back. But even if it does happen, this horror of an authoritarian regime and the horrors that this administration could propagate, there's still hope in that because we have these incredible young people that are unapologetically brown, in Bali's case, that will find the light even in the darkest of moments. And I think that is like how I see our speculative fiction and our sci-fi.
Yeah, Abby, you've worked in so many genres. This is, speculative fiction. Was this sort of obviously it was new for you. Did it allow you and Paola or you personally to go somewhere that you might not have been able to go in your other work, like, Breaking Free, or your sort of your memoir, your fiction work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in many ways, it was scarier because, researching what we could be doing in 10 years is really phenomenally terrifying. But, and also I think we had some fun discussions about what the technology of this world would be and how much AI would be ahead of us and kind of deleting the need for humans. But I don't think we actually wound up being far ahead in the future because of where we are right now in many ways. And I think that it was a great exercise to see where we could be as on a technological front, but really what we needed to get to was where would we be emotionally and where would we be in terms of how humans are treating each other, because it's not even a question of whether the zombies or the robots are going to overtake us. It's really how we're treating each other and how we're taking each other on this path of discrimination and abuse, and we're not going to have a future if we treat each other like this. It's not any other force that's going to come and overtake us. It's not any aliens, and it's not the sky melting. It's us treating each other with more human dignity.
Mm-hmm. Looking back at Sanctuary now that it's out or about to be out in the world, what's the most joyful and then the most maybe difficult part of the novel to read for both of you? So the most joyful, and then in contrast, maybe the most difficult for you guys to read after the fact.
I just did the audiobook, so that's very fresh in my mind. I will say the most joyful is the carousel scene. And that scene is of a moment of Ernie, the little brother, being able to be a child and after accomplishing a very impossible feat. So that to me is really beautiful and special. And the most difficult moment, I don't want to give anything away, but there is a death that is really painful in the book, and in many ways is reminiscent and inspired by actual deaths of people that have succumbed trying to get to this country in numerous ways. So I would say, I'm being a little bit, obviously not wanting to give away many details, but I would say those are the two most difficult and joyful parts.
Abby?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's the most painful, is that same moment. I also don't want to give anything away, but my most joyful moment is being in the water. So Valley experiencing water as a rebirth, and just all that goes with it, the interconnectivity of all the different waters of the world, and how she's weightless when she's in there.
Yeah, beautiful. That is a beautiful scene. And I think we can all relate very deeply, right? Something about water as not just a symbol of catharsis, but actually this physical state that's so unlike our everyday kind of, the way gravity works on us, right? And kind of weighs us down. I love that. So as I kind of move toward the end of this interview, you both have in your different spaces, in your creative spaces, in your nonfiction spaces, received recognitions, institutional recognitions, awards, accolades. Why is that? Why, especially for our Latinx creators that have been traditionally swept aside, why might these kinds of recognitions resonate maybe differently to the way these institutions sort of typically work to promote and advertise? I feel like the recognition for Latinxes and for those who've been historically pushed to the margins, women, POC, etc., it means something different. Could you guys speak to that maybe?
Yeah. I think that as a woman and as an immigrant, as a woman of color, this country wants to keep me in a lane. It wants me to remain in my quote unquote place. And just the way that Latinx people, brown people, and Black people aren't necessarily imagined in the future of, for the most part, white science fiction writers, I feel that this country doesn't want our voices to be recognized in the mainstream awards capacity, because then they have to truly reckon with our voice. They have to reckon with our power. Though our power lies outside of those awards and that recognition, being brought into that world does give you a certain amount of power, structural power. And so I think, I kind of function in two spaces. One is absolutely I want that recognition, and absolutely I want to be I want Americans to consider me American, right? I want Black, brown, Asian folks to be American enough where they can no longer say to us, go back to where you came from. And that comes with being so embedded in the visibility of this country that the idea for my son, who's 7 years old, for that concept to be foreign to him is something that I strive. And for that to happen, that means that representation truly matters. It matters in the cartoons that he's consuming. It matters in the video games that he's playing. It matters in the books that he's reading at 7 years old. And it will matter for the rest of his life, so that the fabric of America, the visual fabric of America, is the world as we see it in New York. And that's why those awards do 100% matter. But on the other hand, I also say, fuck those awards. Like, I have my community. I have my people. I love getting DMs on my Instagram from people saying, you know, that they saw my movie that was made 10 years ago on XYZ platform, and that it moved them, and that it made them think of their mom, of their grandmother, of their aunt, of their own stories. And that is ultimately more valuable on an individual basis than XYZ award. And that is the thing that motivates me. The thing that motivates me in the darkest of days is not the yearning for an award. The thing that motivates me is having that connection with that person that says, thank you, because now I can do this too, or thank you for telling my mom's story, or thank you for seeing me. That is the thing that motivates me in the darkest of days.
Abby?
Yeah, I think in terms of, well, I don't pretend to represent someone underrepresented, because I'm a white girl from Westchester, New York. But I do think it's of the utmost importance that, exactly as Paola is saying, that we bring up the next generation in a world where, or that we create a world where it doesn't need to be another category or another lane, that we're all in the same category. I guess the only similarity is that I feel the same way when I write about my own mental illness and about the secrecy of certain, or the taboo of certain illnesses. And I think that kind of connection, when somebody reaches out and says, thank you for explaining what I've been feeling, that is so much more than any award. But again, mental illness becomes another lane in some ways. Like, we can handle when somebody has a broken leg, that they get the cast and people sign their cast, but we can't handle when somebody is mentally unstable, and that is not acceptable. So we have so many delineations of what is awardable in our country, and that just has to change. And whatever we can do to change that is what needs to be done.
Well, you two are certainly working and doing all of the important stuff to make those changes. It has been a huge honor for me to be able to spend some time with both of you. Abby, Sher, Paola Mendoza, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such a joy. Thank you.